Okay, so all the devotees they got ready. I was wondering, how come it jumped into Prabhupada being in Montreal? Now it covers before Prabhupada goes to Montreal, it covers here. But anyway, all the devotees were ready. Three families headed towards San Francisco, London, right, to preach message of Lord Chaitanya in a new place. Here we will read. Srila Prabhupada's visit to Montreal took place early in the summer of 1968, 6 months after his return to America. So this is I don't know how Sasru Maharaj jumped 6 months advance in that top above message. In India from July to December of 1967, he had recovered his health, and on December 14th, he had returned to San Francisco. After a few weeks, he had gone to Los Angeles, where a small group of disciples had opened a storefront temple in the middle class, Black and Hispanic neighborhood. The storefront was bare and the location secluded. Prabhupada had stayed there 2 months, delivering lectures, holding kirtans, and giving strength and inspiration to his disciples. Although a buzzing in his head had made working difficult, he had found the warm climate and sunshine agreeable and had continued to translate Srimad Bhagavatam, dictating tapes and sending them to Boston for typing. A reporter from Life had come to Srila Prabhupada's department. A reporter from Life had come to Srila Prabhupada's apartment and interviewed him for an upcoming Life feature, The Year of the Guru. The Year of the Guru. When the story had appeared, it had mixed Srila Prabhupada and his movement with coverage of other gurus. Although the article had carried a large color photos of Srila Prabhupada and favorably described a reporter's visit to New York ISKCON Center, Prabhupada had said that being grouped with the gurus who taught concoctions of yoga and meditation was not good. In May, a few months after leaving Los Angeles, Prabhupada had paid a first visit to ISKCON Center in Boston. There also he had found a few disciples based in a small storefront. He had lectured at many of the local universities, including Harvard and MIT. At MIT, addressing a gathering of students and faculty, he had challenged, where in this university is their department to teach scientifically the difference between a living body and a dead body? The most fundamental science, the science of the living soul, was not being taught. After Boston, Srila Prabhupada had come to Montreal, and after 3 months in Montreal, Prabhupada flew to Seattle, where he stayed for 1 month. Then he briefly visited Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the ISKCON Center was a tiny, isolated storefront. Haribol. So here we see that plants are being seeded in different places. Nipa dropped, looks like. Nipa was there. Seeds are being planted. And here it says what happened Prabhupada after came from India. He came in December, and for 6 months he visited different centers before he went to Montreal. He went to LA, he went to San Francisco. Did he go to San Francisco? Yeah, he landed in San Francisco, right? Yeah. Then he went to LA, he helped the small group of devotees. He stayed for a couple of months there. Then he went to Boston, he went to New York. Did he go to New York? I'm sure he must have gone to New York because he's gone to Boston. So Boston also has the small storefront. And also a reporter from the Life came and tried to take a interview for Prabhupada and reported. Prabhupada, even though he's reported, but he's not very happy with the way he mixed up with so many gurus. Basically, there is no difference he presented. Then he went to Montreal. No, he went to MIT and Harvard. He addressed there at Boston, and then he went to Montreal. He stayed in Montreal for 3 months. So that's where all the devotees met before they went to uh, London. Before they went to UK, they met all the devotees in Montreal. And Prabhupada, after Montreal, he went to this place, Seattle, where he stayed for 1 month. Then he briefly visited Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the ISKCON Center was a tiny, isolated storefront. How it's starting small, so it's starting at the beginning, But let's see what happens. So I can go read this.
In May, a few months after after Boston, Srila Prabhupada had come to Montreal, and after 3 months in Montreal, Prabhupada flew to Seattle, where he stayed for 1 month. Then he briefly visited Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the ISKCON Center was a tiny, isolated storefront. Prabhupada's reasons for traveling from center to center were to train and convince each disciple and to speak with newcomers. Many young people came to hear, but Prabhupada found the majority already ruined by illicit sex and drugs. They were rich men's sons, but they had become hippies, wandering the streets. By Krishna's grace, now some of them were being saved. Even while recuperating in India, Prabhupada had always thought of returning to America to continue his movement. The Indians had seemed interested only in sense gratification, like that of the Americans. But many American youths, disillusioned with their father's wealth, were not going to the skyscrapers or to their father's businesses. As Prabhupada had seen from his stay in New York City and San Francisco, thousands of youths were seeking an alternative to materialism. Frustrated, they were ripe for spiritual knowledge. The devotees, still neophytes, knew nothing of spiritual life and in most cases were little of material life. But because they were sincerely taken to Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada was confident that their shortcomings would not prevent their spiritual progress. Although naturally beautiful, these Western youths were now dirty and morose. Their beauty had become covered, but the chanting of Hare Krishna was reviving them. Prabhupada said, just as the monsoon revives the land of Vrindavan, making it fresh and verdant, and as the Vrindavan peacocks sometimes dance jubilantly, so the devotees, having shed their material bonds, were now ecstatically dancing and chanting the holy names. When a reporter asked Prabhupada if his disciples were hippies, Prabhupada replied, no, we are not hippies, we are happies. So here, basically, it talks about Prabhupada's reasons for traveling from center to center. The main purpose was to train and convince each disciple and to speak with the newcomers. And Prabhupada found that many of the young people, basically, they were getting spoiled because they were rich men's children, and they were already spoiled by illicit sex or drugs. And now by the Krishna conscious movement, they're being saved. And even while recovering in India, Prabhupada always wanted to come back to America to continue his movement. And even like in India, they were only interested in sense gratification, but all the hippies, some of them were rich, they were wealthy, they were disillusioned with their father's wealth, they were not going to take care of their father's business, and many of them were looking for an alternative, and they were all actually, it was the right time, and they were ripe for spiritual knowledge. And when they became devotees, they were still neophytes. They did not know much of spiritual life, but they were taking to Krishna consciousness seriously. And Prabhupada was confident that their shortcomings would not prevent their progress. So, and he gives an example that as when the monsoon comes to Vrindavan, the land becomes very fresh, lush and green, and the peacocks are dancing. So similarly, the devotees, as they take to Krishna consciousness, they will shed their material bonds, and they will dance and chant the holy names. And here he mentions that when asked that they're no longer hippies, but they all are happies.
It's amazing, how they open small, didn't worry about what big or small, all these things. Okay, so emergency and so very new people, how they could learn and they could open so soon. Different part and very tiny spots. They took it and ran it. Okay, AJ.
More than being a visiting lecturer or a formal guide, Srila Prabhupada was the spiritual father of his disciples. They accepted him as their real father, and he found them devoted and affectionate, far more than his own family had been. These young American boys and girls, the flower of your country, Prabhupada called them, had received the blessing of Lord Chaitanya and were delivering the blessing to their countrymen. Prabhupada said it was up to his American disciples to save their country. Excuse me. He was giving them the method, but they would have to implement it. Srila Prabhupada loved his disciples and they loved him. Out of love, he was giving them the greatest treasure, and out of love, they were following his instructions. This was the essence of spiritual life. On the basis of this love, the Krishna consciousness movement would grow. Not surprisingly, some disciples had fallen away to their former materialistic way of living, but Prabhupada sought those sincere souls who would stay. That was the important thing, he said. One moon is more valuable than many stars, so even a few sincere workers would accomplish wonderful things. The sincere and intelligent would stay, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would empower them to carry out his desires for distributing love of Krishna. In this way, the devotees' lives would become perfect. Many disciples, in fact, already felt this happening. Krishna consciousness worked because they sincerely practiced it and because Srila Prabhupada carefully and patiently tended the growing plants of transcendental loving service he had planted in their hearts. Los Angeles, October 1968. Srila Prabhupada returned to find the devotees living and worshiping in an exciting location on Hollywood Boulevard. A large Sankirtan party organized by his disciple Tamala Krishna would chant Hare Krishna on the streets all day and sell Back to Godhead magazines in larger quantities than ever before, as many as 200 magazines a day with a collection of over $100. Then one day, shortly after Prabhupada's arrival, the landlord evicted the devotees from their place on Hollywood Boulevard. With no temple, the devotees moved to scattered locations throughout the city. As many evenings as possible, however, they would all gather in someone's garage lent to them for the evening, and Srila Prabhupada would chant Hare Krishna with them and lecture. Then Prabhupada rented a former Christian church on La Cienega Boulevard. He introduced a more regulated deity worship and an increased Sunday love feast. Each week, he would bring a new, specially planned festival with a big feast and hundreds of guests. These new programs in Los Angeles encouraged Prabhupada, and he wanted to see them introduced in ISKCON centers throughout the world. So yeah, initially, Prabhupada was talking about the love. Well, they were talking about the love that the disciples had for Prabhupada and the love that he had for them, and how the disciples viewed him as not only as a spiritual father, but as their real father. Due to the devotion and affection that he showed towards them, and he calls his disciples the flowers of the country. The best and brightest of America, essentially. And he was saying that. Oh, sorry. So he was saying he's giving them the greatest treasure of love, and they were following his instructions, and he talks about how some of the disciples that were there before he went back to India have disappeared, right? They've fallen away and they've gone back to their old habits and things like that. But and it goes back to something we read before where he talks about how the sincere souls, right, are all they need. They don't need, and I like the way he puts it, right? One moon is more valuable than many stars. So he only needs a few sincere people versus a bunch of kind of hangers on, I guess. So then they go into it talks about how the disciples in Hollywood or in Los Angeles were doing great things. Massive Sankirtan parties all day, and they would sing and chant all day, and they were selling more copies of Back to Godhead than in a single day than were ever sold before, making like $100 a day, which I guess at 50 cents a pop, right? So, and then they got evicted, and which I wonder why, right? Just as after Prabhupada showed up, they got evicted. I don't know what he did, but so they got evicted, and they rented a church, and Prabhupada started to kind of add a little more structure to their worship overall, more regulated deity worship, larger love feasts on Sundays, and just more structure in general. It sounds like making planned festivals, and hundreds of guests would come. And as a result of seeing the success of these things done in LA, he wanted to then kind of introduce them and spread them to all the ISKCON centers that had opened.
They may be evicted because of they found again, they know this now foreign person, something like that. They might be doing something like why they would.
Who knows?
When your own people do, you won't mind that much. When you see somebody's influencing, they don't understand.
Yeah.
That can be, they find it not comfortable as
well.
well.
It probably wasn't Prabhupada's fault.
No, I don't think it'll be fault. But after he came, what happens? Before he came, it was all local people, and then the people see this connection. I wanted to. I missed this part. In 1960, Prabhupada returned to find the devotees living and worshipping in an exciting location on Hollywood Boulevard, large Sankirtan party organized by his disciple Tamal Krishna. I don't remember when Tamal Krishna came into picture. He's stalwart in Krishna consciousness. I was wondering when his appearance will happen. I didn't see his initiation also.
I don't think we read that.
Yeah, I don't think they talked about it.
Yeah, I think we will read. He also found in the hippies group.
It looks like he's also from West Coast, so either Los Angeles or San Francisco.
Yeah, West Coast only. Those hippie land. Maybe he's, I don't know where, but that's what he was found in hippie groups. He's one of the stalwart devotee. All become kind of a right hand for Prabhupada. He's going to become 200 magazines a day. So anyway, maybe Krishna. This was LA, right? Yeah, Los Angeles. Now one of the very good temple in Los Angeles they have now. Nipa?
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada was planning to go to England, but first he wanted to visit his farm project in West Virginia, and he had also been promising the devotees in San Francisco he would attend this Rath Yatra festival in July. This traveling to establish and expand his ISKCON was alone enough to keep him busy. Yet he was also always meditating on his work of translating and commenting on Vedic literatures. In LA during December, Srila Prabhupada had begun the Nectar of Devotion, a summary such study of Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasa Amrita Sindhu. The Nectar of Devotion would be a handbook for his disciples, elaborately explaining the science and practice of Bhakti Yoga. Simultaneous with the Nectar of Devotion, he had also begun Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, a summary study of Srimad Bhagavatam's 10th canto. Visiting the temple only on Sundays, he had spent most of his time at a small rented house on the outskirts of Beverly Hills, where he worked intensely on his two major literary projects. Prabhupada's most ambitious literary undertaking, the completion of Srimad Bhagavatam, was to be no less than 60 volumes. He had begun in India in 1959, and all along he had been aware that he was attempting a gigantic task at an advanced age. Now Krishna was giving him opportunities both for writing Vedic literatures and for traveling, and he was working at an amazing pace. So here it says Srila Prabhupada was planning to go to England, and but he first wanted to visit his farm project in West Virginia. And he was also has promised the devotees in San Francisco that he would attend the Rath Yatra festival in July. This traveling was to establish and expand his ISKCON, was alone enough keeping him all busy. And he was also meditating on his translation and commenting on Vedic literature. In LA during December, Srila Prabhupada had also begun his work for Nectar of Devotion, which is a summary study of Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasa Amrit Sindhu. The Nectar of Devotion was like a handbook for his disciples, which would be elaborating the science and practice of Bhakti Yoga. Simultaneous with the Nectar of Devotion, he had begun the the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which was the summary of Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto. He would visit temples on Sundays. He had spent most of his time in the rented house, which was on the outskirts of Beverly Hills, where he was working intensely with his literary projects, which was two literary projects. Prabhupada's most ambitious undertaking was his literary project. The completion of Srimad Bhagavatam was to be no less than 60 volumes. He had begun in India in 1959, and this was like a gigantic task at an advanced age. And now Krishna was giving him opportunities for writing Vedic literatures, traveling at an amazing pace.
Oh, I'm sorry. Isn't it such an amazing how one person can do with such a pressure translating this such a highly elevated the literatures.
And that also, like, he was staying in a rented house, and then he had promised Rath Yatra at the same time. I mean, multiple tasks, like huge task for a humanly body to accomplish.
Humanly, it's impossible task.
I have seen people who do just like reading of one chapter in college over here, and they're like, we are tired. And this person here comes from nowhere.
We are done for the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you for, those who understand this, they will grow. And here I see that West Virginia somewhere started already. He first wanted to visit his farm project in West Virginia. I thought West Virginia was kind of started with Kirtan, and then he will go. That's itself is interesting contribution. We are like doing peanuts.
I think West Virginia is Hayagriva Prabhu and Kirtananda Prabhu.
They both went, okay. But we
didn't. I think they both who started that West Virginia Vrindavan.
Who?
Hayagriva Prabhu and Kirtananda, Swami Kirtananda.
They I don't know. I didn't read. Maybe I missed it. Sometimes they do all read. Now he's giving nectar of devotion, such a high level in spite of in this busy schedule. And then Srimad Bhagavatam compilation. Just for reading itself is enough for us. Whole life is going only for reading for a couple of one book actually, not even a couple of books. Anyway, he's not ordinary person. He's incarnation of Lord's. Otherwise, no one can do Shakti Vesavatar. This one you read, no? Okay. The force driving. Okay, who is there? Vijayananto, please read.
The force driving Prabhupada was the desire of his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. As for how much time he had remaining to execute his mission, that was in Krishna's hands. Everything was up to Krishna. If Krishna wants to kill you, no one can save you. And if Krishna wants to save you, no one can kill you. Yet, although Prabhupada was always in transcendental consciousness, beyond the effects of old age, he was aware that he did not have many more years left. All along, he had the vision of a spiritual movement for all the nations and cultures, and to establish this, he was racing against time. Srila Prabhupada's mood of urgency was a natural mood of the Vaishnava preacher, an ambition to engage everyone in loving service to Krishna. Without Krishna consciousness, the bewildered, conditioned souls of Kali Yuga were all heading for the horrible consequences of their sinful lives. Prabhupada's sense of urgency, therefore, was an expression of his compassion. He wanted to save the gross materialists who were blind to the existence of the soul. If they wasted their human life, they would suffer millions of years before getting another chance to awaken their Krishna consciousness and go back to Godhead. The heart attack Prabhupada had endured in 1967 had accelerated his mood of urgency. Although before the heart attack, he had often worked like a young man and played the drums for hours, now Krishna's warning was clear. The heart attack was to have been the time of his death. Prabhupada had said, but because of his disciples had prayed, our master had not finished his work, please protect him. Krishna had spared him. Similarly, on the boat to America in 1965, his heart almost failed, but then also Krishna had saved his life. The scope of Prabhupada's work was enormous. Even with many years and good health, he could never finish. Prabhupada saw that in future generation, many people would come forward to help, and thus by a combined effort, the Krishna consciousness movement would continue to check the forces of Kali Yuga and save the entire world. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had predicted this, and Prabhupada knew that it must come to pass. But the task of erecting the framework for this universal effort rested on Prabhupada alone, and he worked tirelessly, knowing that unless established a complete foundation, the entire mission might later collapse.
Nice.
So Prabhupada, for Prabhupada, the force driving to make all the arrangements and all the temples and everything was because was due to the desire of his spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, and he also knew that he had like very limited time, and it was in Krishna's hands, and everything was up to Krishna. And he was saying like, if Krishna wants to kill you, no one can save you, and if Krishna wants to save you, no one can kill you. So although Prabhupada was like in like transcendental consciousness, and because of his old age, and he knew that he did not have many years to live, and the only thing he had a vision of a spiritual movement that can serve all the nations and cultures. So he was like running a race against that time actually, and Prabhupada's mood of urgency was actually a natural mood of a Vaishnava preacher. His ambition was to engage everyone the loving service of Krishna, and without Krishna consciousness, the conditioned souls of the Kali Yuga are looking to the horrible consequences of the sinful life. And he was really interested to save the gross materialist, and because in case if they waste their human life, and it will take millions of years again to awaken their Krishna consciousness and go back to the Godhead. And also his health condition, his heart attack, which got in 1967, which made him to accelerate his mode of urgency. Although he was like working like a young man and playing drums for hours, but he knew that Krishna's warning was very, very clear. And heart attack was like almost he reached the end of his life, but he knew that it was only because his disciples has prayed to the God, our master had not finished work, please let him protect him, and that is the reason Krishna had spared him. And also like in 1965 during his travel to America in the boat also, he had the same heart attack, but he had almost failed, but Krishna saved his life actually. So also his work, Prabhupada's work was very enormous. Even with what all the things he achieved, even with many years and good health, he could never finish. Also he saw that in future there will be people coming to help, and so by his combined effort and the Krishna conscious movement should check the forces of the Kali Yuga and should save the world. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu predicted this already. So he strongly believed that he has to establish a framework that that should be like that should have all the foundation, and it was resting on Prabhupada alone. And he knew that in case if he did not establish such a foundation, then the entire mission might collapse later.
Okay. Sridhar, speaker.
Beginning with Prabhupada's first success in New York City in 1966, Krishna had shown unlimited opportunities for spreading Krishna consciousness. But how much time was there? Only Krishna could say. It was up to him. Prabhupada remained even mindful of the vast scope of his mission and the ever narrowing span of time he had in which to complete it. I am an old man, he often told his disciples. I could pass away at any moment. Srila Prabhupada would receive several letters a week from the devotees in London. It was now December 1968. The devotees had been in London 4 months, and still they had no temple nor even a place where they could live and worship together. Mostly they had been visiting Hindu families, holding kirtan and sharing prasadam. Srila Prabhupada had encouraged this. First, after hearing a few reports, he decided the program was stagnant. The devotees should not expect much from the Hindus, he said. They have become hodgepodge due to so many years of subjugation by foreigners and have lost their own culture. I am concerned to preach this gospel among the Europeans and Americans. The devotees were jolted, but they knew Srila Prabhupada was right. Determined to change their tactics, they immediately began lecturing at colleges and universities and chanting in the streets. They were preaching to the British, and it all felt right. When they wrote to Prabhupada that although they had accomplished little, they were planting seeds, Prabhupada replied. Regarding your analogy of sowing Krishna conscious seeds, I may inform you that there is a Bengali proverb, Sabure moyo phale. This means that fruits like chestnuts and pomegranates or similar other valuable fruits and nuts take some time to be fructified. So any good thing comes into our possession after hard struggle and endeavor. So Krishna consciousness is the greatest of all good fruits. We must therefore have necessary endurance and enthusiasm to get the results. We shall never be disappointed when things are presented in reversed order. Anyway, your honest labor is now coming to be fructified. Always depend upon Krishna and go on working with enthusiasm, patience, and conviction. So here we see, how Krishna has been giving unlimited opportunities for spreading Krishna consciousness to Srila Prabhupada, like starting from his first success in New York City in 1966. But again, how much for how long? There was very little time left, and Srila Prabhupada was already very, very old. And then there is still very vast scope for his mission to expand. And Srila Prabhupada would often tell his disciples that he's a very old man, and then he could pass away at any moment. And then Srila Prabhupada received many letters from devotees in London. So it was already December of 1968, and the devotees had been in London for almost 4 months. But still, there was no temple that was still open. Now mostly, the devotees in London, they would visit Hindu families, they would hold kirtans and share prasadam. Srila Prabhupada encouraged this in the beginning, but again, after hearing this, after hearing few reports, after a few months, he decided the program was like becoming stagnant. And then he informed devotees that they should not expect so much from Hindus because they have become hodgepodge due to so many years of subjugation by foreigners, and then they eventually lost their own culture. So he wanted to preach to Europeans and Americans. So this was a little shocking to the devotees, but they knew that Srila Prabhupada was right. So there was like Srila Prabhupada is coming with different new tactics and innovative ways to expand the mission. And then so the devotees in London started lecturing to the students in colleges and universities and chanting in the streets. So they started now preaching to the British Europeans, and then it now felt a little better. Some movement they saw, I guess. So then they wrote to Srila Prabhupada that although they accomplished little, Srila Prabhupada said, okay, they're still planting the seed. So regarding this planting the seed, there is an analogy which Srila Prabhupada says that there's a proverb in Bengali, Sabure moyo phale. This means like fruits like chestnut and pomegranates. such valuable fruits, once you sow it, it takes time to fructify. So it means any good thing, it takes little struggle and endeavor. So Krishna consciousness is that like that valuable seed. So once you sow it, and one must have that patience, endurance, and enthusiasm to get the results. And then no one should be disappointed. So Prabhupada praised their honest labor, and then it will definitely fructify. And then you always encourage them to depend on Krishna, and then go on working with enthusiasm, patience, and conviction.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight all of you what Prabhupada's point here. Your seat, please. That did you focus on this? Okay. So it means what it means. Anyone can tell? Yeah, fine.
Right. If I had to guess, it was saying that he's saying these guys, the Hindus have kind of lost their culture. They've adapted to British culture more than Indian culture at this point. So, you're not going to, more than likely, you're not going to find much support from them because they've kind of lost their way in terms of the Hindu religion. Or am I way off?
Thank you. Anyone else? I can tell, a few things. It's a lesson for us, those who are already into it. We cannot, it's not in a cold-blooded, cannot preach. One is cold, he cannot preach. So that's the situation of these things. They may come and they will do, okay, I'm okay, I'll give you $50. I may give $100 and I may ring the bell. So this is a big thing. So basically there are two things. For preachers, whether we are, came from Hindu background or not, or whatever it is, it's a lesson that who we should count on. And those who are preachers, it's a lesson for us so that we don't fall under that kind of, cold blood category. In the sense that, there has to be fire, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, the one who has a life, he will preach. That's repeatedly again and again that is told. It's very rare now, to have that mindset, psychology in Hindu backgrounds. Just wanted to see how all of, so we, including myself, should not fall into trap of that thing. We don't set an example like that. Okay, very good. Sridhar is reading.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please read.
Through the spring and summer of 1969, Prabhupada continued touring his American ISKCON centers. From Los Angeles, he had sent Gaurasundara and Govinda Dasi, a young married couple, to Hawaii, and on their invitation that he come during the mango season, he joined them. But when he got there in March, he found that it was not mango season and that his disciples had accomplished little. They had taken jobs and were working full time just to support themselves. New York City, April 9, 1969. Prabhupada traveled to New York City, the birthplace of his Krishna Consciousness Society, where his movement had begun growing for nearly 3 years. Although the center was established and his books were being distributed, he still had to visit to strengthen the devotees. His presence gave them determination and courage. For 7 months, they had carried on without his personal touch, but his visits, when he would sit in his room and reciprocate warmly with them, were vital. Nothing could equal these intimate meetings. Many devotees, new and old, crowded into Prabhupada's apartment at 26 Second Avenue. There was one reporter for the Honolulu Advertiser. Prabhupada said he was putting questions to me. And then he wrote an article. The Swami is a small man, but he is delivering a great message. That is true. I am small, but the message, that is not small. Brahmananda showed Prabhupada a globe with markers representing ISKCON centers. Now there is one in North Carolina, Brahmananda's well. Then it becomes 15. Prabhupada asked. He was smiling and looking directly from one devotee to another. I want each one of you to go and start a center. What is the difficulty? Take one mridanga. Then another person will come and join you. He will take kartalas. When I came here, Brahmananda and Achitananda were dancing. And after chanting, hundreds of men will come to your storefront and enjoy chanting and dancing. The girls also, Rukmini asked. So, during spring and summer of 1969, Prabhupada continued his touring in American ISKCON centers. So from Los Angeles, he sent Gaurasundara and Govinda Dasi to Hawaii. And he said that he would join during mango season upon their invitation. So when he went there in March, there was neither mango season, and his disciples accomplished very little, and they had to take jobs for supporting themselves. So again in New York City on April 9, so Prabhupada traveled to New York City, which was the birthplace of his Krishna consciousness movement. Although it was established and even books were being distributed, he still had to visit to strengthen his devotees because his presence gave them determination and courage. So his visits were vital, and those intimate meetings which he had with his devotees were very vital to those people. And at Prabhupada's apartment, many devotees, new and old, used to come. And there was one reporter from for the Honolulu Advertiser. So he was putting questions to Prabhupada, and he said that he was a small man, but he was delivering a great message. So Prabhupada said that yes, he is indeed a small man, but whatever message he was delivering was not at all small.
Nice. Hmm.
So
You want me to explain? I will do that. Yeah.
Yes.
So Prabhupada's point looks like already 14 centers are there. He's asking all the devotees when we will have the 15. Then it becomes 15 when the new center comes. Because when Brahmananda mentioned that there's now there's one center in North Carolina, so Prabhupada, then it becomes 15. So then you say, what is the difficulty? Everyone, interestingly saying, now everyone go and create open a center. Just take one mridang and kartal, somebody will come and they will do it. Now here Rukmini, you know who is Rukmini Mataji, right? Or the other day you joined the call with Anuttama Prabhu last night, 2 days back. Rukmini Mataji is his wife. And she says, even girls also, Prabhupada, there is no harm. I think you haven't read it. So basically, it's everyone. Just this instruction is for all of us. We don't have to just hang out just there for years and pulling each other. We are the part of the mission, and we should contemplate how we can serve in the mission. Not like I'm eating nicely, sleeping nicely, I'm chanting nicely. That's not the purpose. That is done maybe can be done in Dham. Here we are in the preaching mission, and everyone must have a mission. Otherwise, we will not grow actually. There's one number I can't read the names. Who is 785-764-0945? You wanna read? Oh, Brajespo, you can read.
Yes, Prabhuji. There is no harm, Prabhupada said. Krishna does not make distinction. Female dress or male dress. I mean to say, the female body is weaker, but spiritually the body does not matter. In the absence of Lord Nityananda, his wife Janva Devi was preaching. First, you must understand the philosophy. You must be prepared to answer questions. Krishna will give you intelligence. Just like I was not prepared to answer all these questions, but Krishna gives intelligence. After 8 days in his New York City home, Prabhupada went to Buffalo. At State University of New York at Buffalo, Rupanuga was teaching an accredited course in Krishna Yoga with some 60 students enrolled, regularly chanting the Hare Krishna mantra on beads. Prabhupada stayed for a few days, lecturing and initiating disciples. Then he went to Boston for more initiations and several marriages. Columbus, Ohio, May 9, 1969. The devotees had arranged for Prabhupada and Allen Ginsberg to chant on stage at Ohio State University. Allen had been a friend of the Krishna conscious movement from its first days on the Lower East Side. Shortly after Prabhupada's arrival in Columbus, he stopped by Prabhupada's house and discussed philosophy with Prabhupada for several hours. Allen was friendly with Prabhupada as always, but he doubted whether Krishna consciousness could become popular in America. The need, he said, is for a large single unifying religious movement in America. So here is Krishna, Prabhupada replied, all attractive. Now you can say, why shall I accept Krishna? But since you ask for a unifying element, then I say, here is Krishna. Now you can analyze, why should you accept Krishna? And I shall reply, why you shall not. Whatever you want or expect from the Supreme or unifying, everything is there in Krishna. If Prabhupada wanted his movement popularized, Allen suggested he should consider omitting many of the sectarian Hindu aspects, such as the dress, the food, and the Sanskrit. Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada replied, was not sectarian or Hindu. Lord Chaitanya had said that a person could chant any name of God, but one must chant. As for the food, Prabhupada explained that any food was acceptable as long as it was purely vegetarian. And dress, there was no structure that Americans wear robes and shave their heads. The Hare Krishna mantra, Prabhupada added, was a natural sound, not foreign. So here Prabhupada is basically talking about Krishna does not make distinctions, female dress or male dress. So Prabhupada is making the point that the body does not matter because everyone is a spiritual being. An example is given. Prabhupada quotes from Chaitanya Charitamrita, like from the Chaitanya Leela. He says, absence of Lord Nityananda, his wife Janva Devi was preaching. So that is how the preaching spirit even was taken ahead by women's. So you must be prepared to answer questions. Krishna will give intelligence. So if we are having a desire, then Krishna is going to provide us intelligence. And then Prabhupada, after 8 days, went to Buffalo from New York City home. And there, the Rupanuga was taking courses on chanting Hare Krishna. 60 students were enrolled. And Prabhupada stayed for a few days, initiating and lecturing. Then he went to Boston for more initiations and several marriages. And then Allen Ginsberg. Prabhupada, and there was a program organized at the university, Columbus, Ohio State University, where Prabhupada and Allen Ginsberg had stage programs. So Alan is asking, that what is the future of Krishna conscious movement? Will it become popular in America? And then he speaks, then he points that America needs one unifying religious movement. And Prabhupada said, yes, it is Krishna. And then Prabhupada put it very nicely. He says that first I say that Krishna is the unifying element, and then you analyze and I'll reply. And then Prabhupada says that, Alan says that if Prabhupada wants to make this movement popularize, then he should omit many of the sectarian Hindu aspects. And Prabhupada straight away says, that Krishna consciousness is not sectarian or Hindu. And he gives the example of Lord Chaitanya, that a person who chant any name of God, he must chant. Chanting is important. And for food, he said vegetarian. And dress, he said that Americans wear robes and shave their heads. It's not necessary. It's not necessary. The Hare Krishna mantra is more important. And this sound is not foreign. So here Prabhupada is really missionary, and he is focusing on his path of taking Krishna consciousness all over the world. Thank you. Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Okay. Alan objected. The Hare Krishna mantra sounded foreign. Perhaps they should think of an alternative. Interesting. More American mantra. This is going on, Prabhupada replied. Some people are inclined to one thing and some to others. And it will go on. It will go on until the end of creation. But our position that we are searching after the center. And where is the center? At Ohio State's Hitchcock Hall, 1,000 students occupied the seats and 1,000 more crowded the aisles and stage. The program began with Kirtan led by Allen Ginsberg. Allen then introduced Prabhupada and Prabhupada lectured. Then Prabhupada began the second and final Kirtan of the evening. The students responded wildly. Those seated stood and danced, some jumping in their seats, and those in the aisles and on the stage also joined in. Amid the thunderous kirtan of nearly 2,000 voices, Prabhupada began to dance, jumping up and down on the speaker's dais. His hands raised high. He threw flowers from his garland, and the students scrambled them for them. The wildly ecstatic kirtan continued for almost an hour, and then Prabhupada brought it to a close. After hundreds of students crowded close around Prabhupada asking him questions. Afterward, many students continued to chant as they left the hall, and some left crying from the new sensation of spiritual happiness. The next day, the ecstatic night of chanting at Hitchcock Hall was the talk of the campus. Prabhupada was pleased with the evening, and he described the event in a letter to devotees in Los Angeles. Yesterday, at the Ohio State University, we had a tremendous meeting, and nearly 2,000 students were dancing, clapping, and chanting along with us. So, it is clear that the student community has a nice potential for accepting this philosophy. Great. So now this continues. Prabhupada kind of convinced him, but still Alan objected. It sounds very foreign. We should have alternative. We want everything for alternative. That's weird. So Prabhupada said this is going on. Some people are inclined to one thing and some are other, and it will go on until the end of creation. But our position is that we are searching after the center, and here is the center. So basically, we establish that okay, whatever you say, whatever people say, but this is what is the Hare Krishna mantra is all. But now he described the situation of Ohio State Hitchcock Hall. Thousands are sitting and thousand are standing. And when Prabhupada began Kirtan, everybody seems jumped and danced wildly. And Prabhupada also jumped. I'm amazed how he could do it. I think that news will also spread to all the devotees when they hear Prabhupada jumped like this. Then the dance will. Um, so, and he threw the flowers, everything. All the students, they felt very ecstatic. They felt very spiritual. It's a talk of the next day in the campus. The what has happened. Some took initiation, and Prabhupada shared this message to his devotees all over. Okay. AJ, you can lead.
New Vrindavan, May 21st, 1969. Accompanied by Kirtananda Swami and Hayagriva, Prabhupada then traveled from Columbus to the New Vrindavan Farm project in the hills of West Virginia. When the car got stuck in a neighbor's garden near the entrance to the property, Prabhupada decided to walk the final 2 miles along the muddy access road that led to the farm. The road soon ended, however, and Prabhupada and his 2 guides picked up a footpath entering the dense forest. The mid-May trees were still coming into foliage, and the sunlight broke through the branches to a carpet of brilliant purple phlox. Prabhupada walked quickly ahead of Kirtananda Swami and Hayagriva, who hurried to keep up. A winding creek repeatedly crossed the path, and Prabhupada would cross by stepping from stone to stone. The road, he said, would not be difficult to travel by ox cart. The forest was like a jungle, just as he had expected and wanted. For the past year, Prabhupada had corresponded with Kirtananda Swami and Hayagriva concerning New Vrindavan, and this correspondence had established the direction for Krishna-conscious country living. Prabhupada had said he wanted the community based on Vedic ideals, everyone living simply, keeping cows and working the land. The devotees would have to develop these ideas gradually. It would take time, but even in the beginning, the keynote should be simple living and high thinking. Because the community would remain completely aloof from the city, it would at first appear inconvenient and austere. But life would be peaceful, free from anxieties of the artificial suburban society based on the hard work for sense gratification. And most important, the members of such a community would be serving Krishna and chanting his name. Prabhupada spoke little, making his way down the path as if at his own home. They stopped beside the creek, and Prabhupada sat down on a blanket. Kirtananda Swami and Hayagriva spread for him on the grass. "We are stopping for Kirtananda," Prabhupada said. "He is tired." Prabhupada and his party drank water from the creek, rested briefly, and then continued. And as they rounded a curve in the road, Prabhupada could see a clearing on the ridge ahead. A small frame house and a barn stood on the lower end of the ridge. These 2 ancient structures, Hayagriva explained, were the only buildings on New Vrindavan's 120 acres. As no vehicles traveled here, the paths were overrun with high grass. A willow spread its branches close by the old house. The settlement was the picture of undisturbed primitive life. So, Prabhupada travels to it's West Virginia, right? Travels to West Virginia with Kirtananda and Hayagriva to check out, New Vrindavan, the settlement that they're creating, and and it sounds like it's rather remote to get to, right? So they get their car stuck, then they have to walk 2 miles, and then the road ends, and they then are on a small path, and as they go through the forest, and they set a nice scene of kind of what they were walking through, that early spring growth and all that. What's funny to think about is in my head I'm picturing Prabhupada like leaping from stone to stone to cross the creek, right? I mean, he's 70 years old, and he's sounds nimble, right? He's bouncing around like a kid, it sounds like, and he's far ahead of both Hayagriva and Kirtananda, and Prabhupada then kind of explains. Well, it talks about Prabhupada's goals for the New Vrindavan settlement. How he wants it to be, and not just that one, but for any Krishna conscious country living center that they open, and based on Vedic ideals, everybody working, living simply. They would keep cows and work the land, and he was saying though that it has to be gradual because it's so radically different than the city life that they're used to, that most people are used to, that it's going to appear inconvenient and austere. But the tagline he said, it should be simple living and high thinking, right? That's the goal. I like then that, they sit down as they're going. Prabhupada finally stops and takes a quick rest, but it's not because he's tired. He says, "We're not stopping because of me. We're stopping because I can tell Kirtananda is looking a little sleepy over there. He's looking a little worn out." And then they finally show up. They continue to walk, and they finally get to the actual buildings that were previously there. A small house and a barn, and a big willow tree, and that was it. And as I said, the last line there, it's the picture, the perfect picture of undisturbed primitive life. It's just untouched land for the most part, or it hasn't been touched in a very long time. So
unbelievable. I don't know how that would be those days. So austere, and car got stuck. Now also, driving on those areas feels so scary, but still unbelievably, Kirtanandas and Hagrid Prabhupada developed that place.
yeah, I do. It's funny though to think of, you always see Prabhupada as this small man, and he's always, any picture he's seated or he's kind of shuffling along, and then here it's it sounds like he's sprinting through the forest. You know what I mean? Like he's invigorated. It sounds like, and it's fun to read.
It looks like at the beginning it was 120 acres. Now I think it's almost 1,000 acres, something like that. Later also probably they will add another piece of land. I met the devotee who actually owned at the beginning that. Okay, Nipa?
Yes. Prabhupada liked the simple life at New Vrindavan, and whatever simple thing the devotees offered him, he accepted with satisfaction. They served him freshly ground wheat cereal cooked in milk, and he said it was wonderful. When he saw the kitchen's dirt floor covered the cow dung, he approved, saying it was just like in an Indian village. Prabhupada also liked his room in the attic, directly above the temple room. He brought out the small Radha Krishna deities he had been traveling with for the last month and a half, and had his servant Devananda improvise an altar on a small table to one side of the room. Arranging his two trunks as a desk and placing the picture of his spiritual master on one of the trunks, Prabhupada immediately resumed his usual schedule. He would take this late morning massage sitting outside and then bathe with warm water in an improvised outdoor shower stall. Kirtanananda Swami prepared Prabhupada's usual lunch of dal, rice, and chapati, plus some local pork wheat. The previous summer, Kirtanananda Swami and Haigriva had picked and canned blackberries, which they now served Prabhupada as blackberry chutney. The chapatis were from freshly milled whole wheat, and everything was cooked over a wood fire. The best fuel for cooking, Prabhupada said, was cow dung. Wood was second, gas third, and electricity last. Prabhupada spent much of the day out of doors under a persimmon tree about 100 feet from the house. There he would sit and read at a low table one of the men had built. Often he would look up from his reading and gaze across the deep valley to the distant ridge where the forest met the sky. Shall I continue? So here it says Prabhupada was liking the simple life, like the simple life in New Vrindavan, and he would eat whatever the devotees had to offer him. They served him a wheat cereal cooked in milk, and he would say, "Wonderful." And when he saw the kitchen's dirt floor covered with cow dung, he approved, saying it looks like an Indian village. Prabhupada also liked his room in the attic above the temple room. He brought small Radha Krishna deities he had been carrying for a month and a half, and had his servant Devananda improvise the altar, and then he could place it. Arranging his two trunks and placing the picture of his spiritual master, Prabhupada resumed his usual schedule. He would take his late morning massage sitting outside and bathe with warm water in an improvised outdoor. Kirtanananda Swami used to prepare lunch of dal, rice, and chapati and a local pork meat. And there was Kirtanananda Swami and Haigriva had picked canned blackberries, which Prabhupada had made a blackberry chutney out of. and which was served as a blackberry chutney. Then chapati was freshly milled whole wheat, and everything was cooked over wood fire. And Prabhupada had said that cow dung was like the best fuel, and wood was second, gas third, and electricity comes last. Prabhupada spent much of his days outside under a persimmon tree, and then he would sit there and read at a low table. And he would look up reading and gaze across the deep valley of distant range where the forest met the sky.
Nice. One more devotee can read. Who wants to read? Seeker.
In the late afternoon, devotees would gather under the persimmon tree with Prabhupada, sitting and talking with him until after sunset. They saw Prabhupada living with them as a practical demonstration of New Vrindavan's importance. If he, the greatest devotee, could be satisfied living simply and chanting Hare Krishna in his backwoods settings, then they should follow his example. Comparing New Vrindavan to Vrindavan in India, Prabhupada said that New Vrindavan was in some way better, since Vrindavan, India, was now congested with worldly men. 500 years ago, the Goswamis followers of Lord Chaitanya had excavated the sites of Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, and only pure devotees had lived there. But in recent years, Vrindavan had become a place for materialists and impersonalists. New Vrindavan, however, should admit only the spiritually inclined. In Vedic society, Prabhupada said everyone had been satisfied to live like this, in a small village beside a river. Factories were unnecessary. Prabhupada wanted this Vedic way of life for the entire world, and New Vrindavan could serve as a model for the benefit of the masses. New Vrindavan had no phone, and mail had to be fetched by 2-mile walk. In this, Prabhupada said New Vrindavan was like Vrindavan, India. Both Vrindavans lacked in modern amenities. This difficulty, however, coupled well with the Vaishnava philosophy that modern amenities were not worth the trouble required to get them. A devotee, accepting whatever nature provides, spent his time and energy in spiritual life. New Vrindavan's only cow was a black and white crossbreed named Kalia, and Prabhupada would drink a little of her milk morning, noon, and night. I have not tasted milk like this in 65 years, he said. One day he predicted New Vrindavan would have many cows, and their udders would be so full that dripping milk would muddy the pastures. Although people in the West were blind to this great sin of cow slaughter and its reverse karmic reaction, he said New Vrindavan would demonstrate to the world the social, moral, and economic advantages of protecting the cows and utilizing her milk rather than killing her and eating her flesh. So in the afternoons, devotees would gather around Prabhupada under the tree, and then they would sit and talk with him until sunset. So so they saw Srila Prabhupada's living in New Vrindavan as a practical demonstration of how important that project is for Prabhupada. If a great devotee like Srila Prabhupada could be satisfied simply living and chanting Hare Krishna, then they should all follow his example. That's what the devotees felt. So Srila Prabhupada compared New Vrindavan to Vrindavan in India. But in one way, he said that this new Vrindavan is some way better than the original Vrindavan in India, because the Vrindavan in India is very much congested with worldly men. Like about 500 years ago, when Goswamis they excavated the sites of Lord Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, and then only pure devotees would live there. But as time passed by, that Vrindavan had now become a place of materialist and impersonalist. So Srila Prabhupada said, like in Vedic society, everyone were satisfied just living like this in a small village beside a river. So factories were not necessary at all. So Prabhupada wanted such a Vedic way of life to be spread uh, in the entire world. So and then he felt New Vrindavan now could serve as a model for the benefit of the people of this world. And then New Vrindavan was a little remote place. There was no phone or any mail. It had to be delivered by walking 2 miles. So this Srila Prabhupada felt this was like original Vrindavan in India, which also both the Vrindavans, they lacked the modern amenities. So Srila Prabhupada felt again that this difficulty, however, like coupled with the Vaishnava philosophy of the Vaishnava philosophy, that modern amenities are not worth the trouble required to get them. So a devotee should always accept whatever the nature provides and spend his time and energy in spiritual life. So there was only one cow in New Vrindavan. It was a black and white crossbreed, and the name of the cow was Kalia. And then when Prabhupada drank the milk in the morning from that cow, he said that he had not tasted the milk like that in 65 years. And then Srila Prabhupada predicted that New Vrindavan would have one day many cows, and then their udders would be so full that the milk dripping from their udders would muddy the pastures there. So although people in the West were like blind to the great sin of cow slaughter, he said New Vrindavan would demonstrate to the whole world the economic, social, moral, and economic advantages of protecting cows and utilizing her milk.
Very well. Thank you. It's such a wonderful reading. And Vrindavan, I saw the original, I think the house where the devotees lived first this time when I went. Hope everyone can visit. And Prabhupada says that there's no difference between both the Vrindavans. And he has vision. It's unbelievable to see. Ajay, have you been there?
It's on
I
my
think,
list.
sorry?
It's on my list of places to go.
It's on your list of places? Okay. I think none of you have been there, right? Why don't we try something as soon as things go, or in winter, we can try going, things looks better. We can spend a couple of nights.
Have you been to the one in out by Harrisburg?
Yeah, we go all the time.
Oh, okay, cool. I'd like to check that out too.
Itanagiri, yes.
Yeah.
There's a cow. Cows also, that's very beautiful.
Mhm.
You know, we will go. We will all go. I didn't see Jeremy. Jeremy, hope to see you tomorrow, AJ.
I'll be there. Yep.
Yeah. So, thank you so much, everyone. We had a wonderful reading. Please contemplate what you read today. So nourishing, so relishing today, actually. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhupada Lilamrita ki jai. We'll convene tomorrow. Hare Krishna.